Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The Minister of Works and Housing of Nigeria, Babatunde Fashola, the weekend said he was misquoted on the claim that federal roads are not as deplorable as the public often portrays them. The minister made the clarification in Ilaramokin, Ifedore local government area of Ondo State, while commissioning the privately funded 4 township roads executed by Chairman Toyota Nigeria Limited, Chief Michael Adeojo. It will be recalled that the minister had on Wednesday in Abuja, the Federal Executive Council meeting, said Nigeria's road surfaces were not as deplorable as the public will make them appear. Fashola, who said contrary to insinuations on social media, he had traveled around the country on rules to assess and assess the condition of federal roads, maintained that the federal government will fix its bad roads based on priority list. We're to discuss this and more. We're now being joined by Achike Chude, a public affairs analyst. Achike, good morning. Welcome to the morning show.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, what's your comment on this? The Minister of Works and Housing says Nigeria's roads, are not as bad as we think. He hasn't come around to say he was misquoted, because he even alerted the public to the fact that the reporters at the event where he purportedly made that statement would take that as their headline. Now, is the minister right? Is the public wrong? Are the roads in Nigeria not as bad?
Well, he's trying to walk back at the talk. Reality is that it was expected. He expected that there would be a blitzkrieg, if I use that expression, of a barrage of responses, and which is exactly what that statement got fetched him. But the reality again is that there are so many media houses there, and it's not every time that you tend to have the media speak with one voice. They almost, all of them, if you look at the reports of what he was alleged to have said, almost word for word, they all replicated the same thing. And so the media wrong. I don't know about him being misquoted, but it's always easy to blame the media when the politicians make this kind of terrible faux pas. Beyond that, it is always, especially in today's, deeply divided country, due to partisanship, for Nigerians to have a consensus on any particular issue. And you can see that there has been a broad-based consensus in terms of opposition and disagreement with what the minister has said across board, both north and south, because we are all living, witnesses to the state of our roads in the country. And you have even conservative organizations like the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria weighing in on this, issue, and also insinuating that perhaps the minister is not facing reality. Ogun State, I think, Chamber of Commerce and Industry also made the same statement, together with the Nigerian Employers Consultative Assembly. Also, you see that there is so much consensus in terms of the agreement that the minister seems completely out of touch and seems to be living in a cocoon. The reality is you don't know who, if he has said, for instance, from what you have said, that he has visited states in this country. All over across the country, and on the basis of that, he made that statement that the roads are not exactly as bad as they are. I'm not sure. I don't know whether he visited those states by road or he flew by air. But the reality is that it's either Nigerians are liars or the minister is very economical with the truth. We know what we're experiencing. Let's not even if you go beyond the federal roads. The same thing with virtually all these state roads in the country. But we are looking at his area of jurisdiction, federal roads. They are in a very terrible state. In fact, perhaps one of the worst that we have seen for decades in terms of the state of roads everywhere. Are you talking about the southeast from you want to get to Onitsha, from Onitsha to Enugu, Enugu to Port Harcourt through East-West Road, to Warri and down? Are you talking about going from Lagos all the way to Ishenyi, or your state, Kogi State, Abuja? Are you talking about coming in from even Bida all the way to Kwara? Look, we're in a very serious, we're in a terrible situation when it comes to road infrastructure in Nigeria. And of course, we also know that in the era of kidnapping and all kinds of violence being perpetrated on travelers on the roads, the parallel state of these roads also contribute to serious, security imperatives for passengers.
And that goes without no doubt whatsoever, because it does fuel it in more ways than one, and it's very worrying. Now, we're looking at a proposed 262 billion naira allocated to works and housing in the 2020 budget. And although this may seem like quite a figure, it barely scratches the surface if we think about the amounts of infrastructural work that has to go into Nigeria as it stands right now. What is your take and analysis of the amount that has been allocated to works and housing, and how much do you think Nigeria is really going to be able to achieve over the next year in that particular sector with the amount that we have allocated to it?
We are talking about a country that is becoming increasingly difficult to govern. There are some truths that must be spoken about our nation. The politicians, the government cannot deliver on most of the things they talk about. Look at even the budget itself. Look at the monies that they have been borrowing over the years. In the past 3-4 years, they have taken over 13 trillion naira as a loan, from multilateral corporations. These monies have to be paid back. We have been told that they use as much as maybe 40 to 50% of our national budget to service these debts. Then you talk about capital expenditure, as much as maybe 70% of the budget. And so what is it at the end of the day? What actually can they do with what they have? We should have, we're in an emergency situation in Nigeria. They cannot deliver on housing, they cannot deliver on healthcare, they cannot deliver on road infrastructure. Let us say it as it is. A country of about 180 million, people is not a country that you're budgeting about 9 trillion naira for. What are you going to do with 9 trillion naira? These are the realities. But it is like, nobody wants to address the fundamental issues of the Nigerian state. So obviously, I would agree with you that when you're talking about road infrastructure, you should be talking about for now, about 2.3 trillion naira, to build new roads and to repair roads that are bad. You talk about education, it goes into the trillions of naira. You talk about healthcare, it goes into the trillions of naira, and so on. So what it tells you is that regardless of what they say, this is not magic. This is scientific. You put money in something, then you expect to see something come out of it. So when you put drops, just little drops into a mighty ocean, what are you supposed to get? It's not going to be significant under any circumstance. I would have expected that is where the minister would be looking at. But at the very best of times, I don't know where they're going to get the money from. So we are in crisis. He cannot deliver, but for him to now, come and tell us something that we know, we reject it in its entirety. But again, the minister has had this tendency, a lot of them might not have noticed, to speak out of turn. Not too long ago, he said that Nigerians should blame the federal government has no responsibility when it comes to giving, ensuring that we have energy in this country, and that we should go and hold the discourse responsible. I've not heard this kind of reckless statement by any minister in a very long time.
Anyway, I know that the statement by the minister, of Works and Housing has generated a lot of outrage.
It should, it will.
Yeah, and the point that Leila raised about funding, about, budget, is also very important. Fashola himself has said that to address the challenge of infrastructure in Nigeria will need up to about a 10 trillion infrastructure bond. And I think one lawmaker also came forward the other day to say that, look, what is provided for in terms of roads, Nigerian roads, federal roads in the budget is just about 500 roads in Nigeria. And you know that, of course, that won't go anywhere. However, could it be that is the media that actually misquoted Fashola? And at least one newspaper has quoted him in extenso, provided a full transcript of what he said. I would like to read it to you.
Please.
So that, we don't just trade blames and, He says, to appeal to you, yes, we are here to solve problems. Problems are headlines for you, but I think for balance, it is also to show that not all of the roads are bad. Because the focus is on the bad part, but you owe Nigerians whose taxes we use to also show them that some works are going on. Because it is not all Nigerian roads that are unmotorable. On Benin Warri Road, for example, many sections are motorable. It is a path that has caved in and collapsed. And that's where the pain is, and that's where we will respond to. Same thing for Lagos Ibadan. It is important for us to have balance in order to encourage people to have hope in the country, because it is not as bad as sometimes we portray it. That's your headline, we know. But it's important we let them know that on a 100-kilometer stretch, maybe 10 to 15% is bad. So if you look at this, it looks like the minister was actually asking for understanding and
let's look at this
balance and hope.
Yeah, I understand that.
Everybody will just read the headline and they will say, "Oh, the minister."
Yes, he tried to balance it. I understand that clearly.
Yeah, I'm quoting verbatim as
clearly,
published.
Yes, clearly. But again, you look at the quantum. I mean, the amount of roads or the number of roads that we have across the country, and I like that. I mean, if he's looking at maybe percentage defectiveness of the roads and those ones that are also okay, fine, no problem with that. But so what is the, what are those things that are empirically verifiable in terms of the roads across the country? About maybe 80% of the roads are bad, the federal highways. So you cannot, again,
you travel on the roads, you are not one of those who take airplanes or private jets.
I'm a Nigerian. If it becomes necessary to travel by air, I do. I travel by road too. A friend of mine, we were just discussing yesterday, and he said he did Lagos, Abuja, 13 hours. 13 hours, this is a journey that should take about 7-8 hours at most. Even in other places, I've heard people talk about journeys that should take 2 hours, they take 3 hours. So if we're looking at it on the basis of percentage, and the minister says 10% to 15% of the roads are okay, for instance, the road he just talked about, what is the extent of delay? If it is a road that you're supposed to do in 2 hours, and because 75 or 85% of the roads are okay, and you still spend an extra 2-3 hours on the road, how does that translate in terms of maybe looking at the percentage and the overall picture? So that is the reality. Because if we are looking at it on the average, generally nationwide, are we saying that 15%, 10 to 15% of all national roads are bad? We cannot accept that kind of argument. Otherwise, Nigerians will not be complaining. The complaint is based on the quantum of road, on the greater percentage, on the fact that the greater percentage of roads in this country are in a terrible state of disrepair. Nigerians are not a very unreasonable set of people. That is why we've been able to tolerate bad governance for so many years, over 50 years after independence. The reality is that, I mean, all you need to do is just to give them a little, put one or two things on ground for them, and they are going to appreciate it. So if we go by the governor's, I mean, the former minister says, I mean, the minister's statement, that about maybe 15, 10, 20 even, 35% of roads are bad. Nigerians will, okay,
for 1 minute. Let's just take a very quick commercial break, and as soon as we're back, the conversation will continue. Thanks. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We are still in the studio with Achike Chude, public affairs analyst, discussing the latest claims or allegations, some may say, that have come out via the minister with regards to the states of Nigerian roads. Before we went on a break, you were saying...
The funny thing was that it was the minister actually that preempted the media. Fine, maybe he knows the way the media works. So, Ruben has, he read out copiously from the statements the minister said, and the minister also singled out that particular aspect of his conversation and said, I know it is going to be the talking point. And it was a talking point. His prediction came to pass. But anyway, the reality is that we are not in a very good place in this country. You are always going to have all of these deficits in terms of infrastructure, in terms of being able, even social infrastructure, beyond even road infrastructure. And that's why I was saying that you cannot, again, they will tell you, you're operating a budget of 9-point-something trillion, and then you have to pay so much for debt servicing. You have to pay so much in terms of, capital expenditure, recurrent expenditure and all that. So what is left for capital expenditure? Just a pittance of what is actually needed. For a country that has gone so, that has declined so much in terms of infrastructure, so much more is needed. And that's why, you see, every single year we tend to need more, much more than we needed in the past, because we have been putting very little. When we should put so much, we are putting so all of these things, the chicken has come home to roost. Some of these things have caught up with us. So we need to, look for ways. And it's not doing the same old thing and hoping that something new will come out of it. And this is what we have always done. How are you going to rebuild our road infrastructure? Definitely not from the money that is coming from.
So let me take you up on that particular question, because there's also this notion that the fact that certain states don't have control over federal roads within their states also poses a problem for particular states like Lagos, right, that have the ability or the IGR to maybe take care of their own roads, but it's actually a hindrance that they cannot touch on major roads because they're federally owned. And some of these roads are connecting some of the largest networks within the states. So do you think, for example, that federal roads pose one of the greatest problems to states like Lagos, who should have autonomy, let's say, or control over all of the roads so that they can really tackle the problem, especially seeing as now the governor has come out to declare a state of emergency on the state of roads. But we do seem like we may be held back by the federal government.
No, it would have been easier to buy that argument if state roads were working. Look at the state of roads.
Good point.
Look at the state of roads all over the country. I mean, there's also an argument that is being made, for instance, for the proponents of state police, for instance. They are saying, look, we need to handle our own police and all of that, own internal security, that there are obvious advantages associated with that. These are states that are not paying minimum wage to their workers. So, so it's easy for politicians to want to make statements, and gain traction from those statements for whatever reason. But charity begins at home. You have to be in a position. You have to begin to do your own part first, and then when you now make that statement, then a lot of people will sit back and say, yeah, you are making a lot of points. But virtually in most of the states in this country, there is serious breakdown in road infrastructure. So that argument cannot hold, at least at this particular point in time. But when you now have very important roads, because you have also connecting, arterial roads that also connect to those ones, then I think you can always sit down and work out something with the federal government. The last administration in Lagos State was able to do that with the road from the international airport, for instance. And it took a long time. He had to accuse the federal government of not collaborating or cooperating with the state government till he had the permission to work on it. So I think, and a lot of states have also been doing whatever they can do. And at the end of the day, they try to get back to the government. So perhaps to ask the government to reimburse them. Again, we suspect that some of the figures from the states might be inflated to gain advantage from that. I don't know. But these are some of the things. So I don't think that for now we can buy into that argument. It is not, it's not a reflection of what is going on in the country right now. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you alluded to a point earlier about the fact that it's not just roads that are problematic. We have a general infrastructure deficit in Nigeria with implications for development and economic growth and the well-being of the people. Yeah. Now, if you take a holistic view of all of this, what kind of advice will you give government? Where do you think government should start from? Should it be roads? Should it be energy? Should it be hospitals? Should it be education? Because it looks like it's a whole cocktail of challenges.
The late president had talked about. He was talking about in declaring a state of emergency in energy. Then that is Yar'Adua. Eventually, I think he had not yet conceptualized it. Eventually, it didn't happen. It would have been easier to say, look, let's declare a state of emergency on the country in terms of, every aspect of what we do of our national life here, but it's not possible. So in terms of priorities, I think I would go, with Bill Gates, who talked about education and health infrastructure, the lives of the people first. Education, because without education, you can do nothing. We are where we are today. We're also suffering the consequences of not educating our people, both at the political level. You can see the reaction of the people when it comes to politics and political development and the elections. We have seen the implications, the security implications of not educating the people. We are paying a price for that. So I think a lot depends on education. Education is key. It is vital. It is critical. But that is not to say that we neglect some of this infrastructure that we have. We're in a very serious, difficult situation. And so there must be some the government must be able to sit down. And it's not just the government alone. The elites, the political elites, there must be a kind of elitist bargaining. They must sit down and decide what to do with this country.
Bargaining or consensus?
Bargaining, consensus, fine. Bargaining and then consensus. There must be that agreement. There must be an agreement that we cannot continue along this path. You understand? You have to look at the totality of the economy. We have our political issues, which they themselves are in a position to, resolved, but they don't want to do that for certain, personal reasons, selfish reasons. But you can look at the economy and say, look, this issue of, locating resources that belong to the people only within the domain of the federal government, can't we do something about it? The country is blessed, everybody knows. Nigeria and the Congo Democratic Republic, I think two of the richest countries in the world. But look at the level of poverty in those countries. But we have what it takes. I think the former president of the United States, Clinton, when he appeared before the National Assembly at the time, he said, look, that it's not what is here that is critical, it is what is here. Because with what is here, you can actually do something with what is underneath, the soil, and transform a nation and transform a country. So these are the things we need to begin to look at. But that is not the discussion that is going on within government circle. It's all about oil, and more oil. That is already being threatened. In the next, few years or so, people have gone beyond that, and yet we are still steeped in the past. And we cannot continue like that, obviously.
Absolutely. Let me take you back to the topic of roads and discuss another point that the minister came out with recently. I think it was about a month ago, speaking about the reintroduction of tolling on our federal highways. And of course, that was a very controversial one because many people believed that we don't need to continue to pay for what we are not receiving anything in return for. And on the other hand, people believe that, okay, maybe this is going to lead to the maintenance that we yearn for. But it's kind of a chicken and egg situation where do you really start? We need people to pay in order to maintain, but we cannot ask people to pay when we're not maintaining. What is your take on this and how the ministry is trying to go about the reintroduction?
Let me tell you what we're going to do. We're going to resist it. That one is not.
When you say we,
yeah.
What do you mean we?
Yeah.
Who are the we?
Yeah, I can tell you, the Nigerian people will resist it.
Yeah.
I will be part of it.
You remember the Revolution Now movement?
I'll be part of it, and there is a reason. In recent history, will tell us that no matter what they tell you they're going to do with the money from there, it's not going to happen. They're not going to do it. We had the Ibrahim Mantu Committee. We all remember. After one of those major protests over the increase in the pump price of fuel in this country, and they set it up, came up with one voluminous, book like that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, nothing came out of it. You have to resolve the socio-political contradictions in this country before some of these things will begin to work. Now they're going to, and besides, in a country where we are told that 112 million people are living in poverty. How are these people thinking? These are questions you ask yourself. What does the life of the average Nigerian mean? About 94 million Nigerians are living on less than $2 a day. Now they are talking about multidimensional, poverty, whatever that means. How much can you tax the people? You see, our leaders have a way of looking at taxation. You want money, you tax the people. But people do not also understand that sometimes if you want to increase economic activity in a country, you lower taxes. It does not. They are not aware.
You increase your tax base.
When you lower your taxes, so that people will have more money in their pockets to be able to go and buy things and pay for services and stimulate the economy. But for them, it's a one-track mind. It's about we need money, we have to get. So you get money from bank charges. Yesterday, I tried to buy fuel and they told me, Doga, you are going to pay extra 15 naira.
Well, Achike Chude, at this point, we need to take another commercial break. And then when we return, the conversation will continue. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And still with us in our Lagos studio is Achike Chude, public affairs analyst, who has been helping us to take a look at the situation with the Nigerian roads and also the infrastructure deficit that we have here in Nigeria. But Achike, let me ask you a question. Oftentimes we blame federal officials. We focus on the federal government. We blame federal government officials for this and that, and every time, it's normal to say, oh, the president has not done this. How can we also hold people at the state government level and the local government levels responsible in Nigeria? Because oftentimes we tend to overlook those two tiers of government.
That observation is very true, and we have been doing that for a very, very long time. And that is why they keep on also getting away with blue murder. They don't deliver, they don't perform. But I think, again, you have to look at the base. I think it was Dr. Tunji Braithwaite that said that a people that has not mastered the art of putting worthy people in government will end up with charlatans and all kinds of frivolous people. And I think that we're also paying a price.
Are you trying to characterize Nigerian leaders?
Yeah, yes. I mean, there are no two ways about that. I mean, the leaders are responsible, the people are equally responsible. I mean, it takes two to tango. The fact is that the country is not working. Who are those responsible? The leadership and the led. It's a combination. Otherwise, why is it that after 50 years, after 60 years of independence, the country is in the shape that she finds herself in? Who is responsible? People are responsible. There's no doubt about it. There's a political class that has been responsible for the governance of this country and so on. And then you also have the people that should keep the politicians or the political class in check. The people have obviously failed in that, carrying out that responsibility. So these are basic truths. There are no two ways about it. Our leaders have failed. There's corruption everywhere. It did not start today. It has always been, it has been on and has grown exponentially. Who are those people perpetrating the corruption? The leadership, with the people also. During the election, the media houses talk about what happens, during an election period. People, money is stored somewhere so that the people can be bought on the basis of the election and the rest. So these things are true. To live in denial, I don't think will help anybody under any circumstance. So this is the truth. So I agree with you that, the process of ascension to political power is critical. And you see, the fact that a governor ascends the office and does not deliberately work in tandem with the hopes and aspirations of the people is dependent on the fact that he knows that ultimately at the end of the day, his ability to come back to power, it does not remain 100% in the hands of the people. So he can do whatever he wants to do. So we can take it from the surface level and say, look, yes, when you get to power, we should hold you accountable. But the reality is, can we actually hold them accountable since we exactly did not put them where they are today? These are some of the issues. So we must go to the base. But regardless of that, regardless of the imperfection of the electoral processes that bring these people to power, we must also do our own bit. Because somebody once said that the price we have to pay for democracy is eternal vigilance. Our people are not watching.
The price of liberty.
Oh, yes,
it's
exactly.
Eternal vigilance.
It's eternal vigilance. So our people are not, jealously guarding their democracy. And so today, when people, for instance, talk about maybe the government bearing down, for instance, on either the media or civil rights activists and so on, it has to do also with the complacence, docility, and passivity of the people. They know they can do these things and get away with it without relevant government officials asking the question, Oga, this thing you're going to do is going to cause problem for us. I advise we don't go ahead. But they know that they'll get away with it. And so we must change our orientation as a people. I know it's difficult. I don't know who the guardians of the people are, but at least we have those people who have constituted themselves as the conscience of the people.
Okay, so let me take you up on something there, something topical at the moment, because this morning, actually, Femi Falana, SAN, came out to say that the way it's looking right now, it seems as though the DSS are just trying to see how they can instigate and prop up new charges against Omoyele Sowore and probably also his second as well, Olawale Bakare, that's there with him, as they clearly are not set to release him. Now, of course, he met the bail conditions, which were already close to impossible. And even after meeting those conditions, as we know, they still held him in detention and they alleged that nobody came to pick him up, which his lawyer has come out to deny, alongside his family, friends, and activists that stormed the DSS headquarters, or rather went over to the DSS headquarters. What is your take on this particular stance that the DSS is taking, and what threat does it pose to freedom and democracy for the Nigerian people? Because this is looking like the same case that was and still is with Dasuki and also El Zakzaki.
Yeah. Well, I'm not aware that Sowore is an orphan, that he didn't have people that will come and pick him up. I'm not aware that he's an orphan. You look at it, there's a tendency, there's a pattern. And what worries me is that we're beginning to have either decentralization or deregulation of dictatorial powers. Now governors are beginning to exercise, powers over people who write things that they do not like about themselves. It's worrisome. We used to think that that fell within the ambit of the federal government alone, but it has gone beyond that. So now there's a pattern. There's no doubt about that again. We have seen it and we have talked about it in the past few years, that the courts, and that is the reason, that is the essence of democracy. That is the, the essence of having, three arms of government. Interdependent, but independent also at the same time. So it is not the executive. We have made that point at various times. It is the court that decides to deprive a man of his freedom, and there must be a basis of that. When the government comes and says, look, this is the reason why we think this person should not be released, we think it will be dangerous, you have to prove to the court that they can actually deprive this man of his freedom. The court has released this Sowore again. Now there are all kinds of issues. Femi Falana is not a frivolous person. He has an idea that there's an attempt to keep this man in detention. But that is not good for our democracy. And it also reminds me of what is even terrible is that we're beginning to see, even during the military dictatorship, we had instances where, of course, you talk about ouster clauses during the military dictatorship. Edicts cannot be challenged in court, decrees cannot be challenged in court, and so on. But occasionally we had very bold judges who looked beyond even these military edicts and decrees, especially when it had to do with fundamental laws, instruments, international instruments that Nigeria was a signatory to. People like is it the Socrates or Echuhu Difuoputa, Pat Acholono and so on. There are some bold, when Gani Fahimi's passport, for instance, was seized by the DSS, they told them you cannot do that. You do not have the right, you do not have the authority. Release his passport to him. And whenever the courts ruled, regardless of whether the military liked it or not, the decision, they always complied. It wasn't once, twice. It happened several times in the past. That we found ourselves in a situation where a civilian government is also confronted with the same challenges, and the courts, as high as the Supreme Court, makes a judgment. And the government says, we will choose the ones we are going to obey because there are security imperatives. It is the courts that determine what security imperatives are. That's why you bring your evidence before the courts, so that you can convince the courts on the reason why a man will lose his freedom for a particular period of time. On this matter from
yes. What advice will you give to the Department of State Security Services in simple terms, and in the light of the fact that Femi Falana SAN, counsel to Omoyele Sowore, has disclosed that what the DSS is trying to do is to bring up fresh charges on the basis of which they can continue to hold Sowore and Bakare.
I'm worried that the DSS is in a position to embarrass the federal government. It's an institution of states, an institution of the government. And so I want to believe that whatever is causing this intransigence on the part of the DSS is beyond the DSS. That is the only way I can look at it. Because somebody should be able to call the DSS and frown at it that you are flouting the laws of the land. And that these are the laws that set you up as an institution of state. And so the fact that they can do it clearly tells you or tells me that there's something beyond that. But I advise again it's just going to be released on bail. It's not going to run anywhere. We're in a global village. Anybody that tells you that somebody can disappear and you catch the person again is not possible.
No, but the conditions of bail indicate that the court, the learned justice, considers Sowore a flight risk because he's required to stay within Abuja. And not to travel out of the country.
So he should be released within Abuja. That's what we're saying. Whether you consider him a flight risk or not, then at least these are it. And he has a very prominent lawyer. Femi Falana is not a small-time lawyer. So he has his reputation. He's putting his reputation on the line. We want to also, be aware of that. And I think that this should count for something. But obviously, it does not count for anything before the DSS. And I think it is wrong. You don't want to give, look, the country is already, there's so much tension in the land. You want to begin to diffuse tension. You want to begin to give people a sense of let us begin to look at this country from a new perspective. This country is capable of working if only we can begin to do the right things. But that has to start because to whom much is given, much is expected. Let it start with the people that are in power. like I said, Nigerians are not a very difficult people. Nigerians have borne so much, even giving excuses on behalf of the politicians when they were misbehaving. You understand? They are still willing to give more. But the reality is, how much can you take from the people?
Well, when you were talking earlier, you were saying we will not allow this, we will not do that. No. And I asked you, are you a member of the Revolution Now movement, Coalition for Revolution, or you are a sympathizer?
No. Look, I know them. I mean, I have been in the civil society family for a very long time. So I'm not a new person. And I have my views about my country. I want my country to work. I'm not one of those people that will say, look, it's all over. And I tell people it's not all over. I tell people that this country is destined for greatness. I don't know how we're going to achieve that, but that will happen, it will come. So I don't believe in, yeah, we face challenges, but everybody, the only response a lot of us have now is to run away from the country. There is no country like home. We have been told that. As bad as it is, for me, this is one of the greatest countries in the world. Regardless, forget the problems that we have. I believe we will overcome, but only through conscious, deliberate effort on the part of the citizens. And part of that responsibility is to resist bad governance and to look at our political leaders when they are misbehaving and tell them this is not the way to go. And also seek to mobilize our people around the right causes so that they can begin to stand for the right thing and put the right kind of pressure on the political leadership so that they can know, so that they will realize that the people have arisen and we no longer take some of these things that they dish out to them. Perhaps that will jolt them into a greater level of consciousness and responsibility. Ultimately, it will be good for everybody.
Well, in the way in which everything looks right now, there's just a serious human capital deficit. Not only are people leaving in droves, like you mentioned earlier, the fundamentals of human development are not even being provided for: healthcare, education, etc. And at the end of the day, if you're not well, you can't even go to school. You can't do anything. And why it's shocking, and I'll tell you why, is because last week we were analyzing the proposed 2020 budget, and we were looking at healthcare. And if you break it down, what the federal government has literally allocated to each citizen for healthcare in 2020 in the proposed budget is 2,000 naira per person. So one has to ask, where is the starting point? One has to ask, how are we actually then supposed to say that we're really trying to develop our human development index?
It's sad. I will tell you it's sad because countries that were looking up to us before, that are still looking up to us, have left us behind. When you talk about education, Ghana is doing about 20-something%. Healthcare, they are doing about 15%. And so many other smaller countries that we used to look down on before have all moved ahead. You understand? So, and that's why I said that something critical, something must be done. We must have this discussion, whether we like it or not. We must have this discussion about how to move our country forward. I agree with you that we're in a very terrible situation, health-wise and so on. And then you just realize that the government seems hamstrung. You don't even have the money. And then you go a borrowing. And of course, remember when we were told he who goes a borrowing goes a sorrowing now. And it wasn't too long ago. It wasn't too long ago that Obasanjo paid that $12 billion that a lot of us were all up in arms and said it's unprecedented for a government, to just get up and pay $12 billion to the international community. $18 billion was written off.
Thank you very much.
And we enjoyed the process, but look at where we are
Achike Chude, thank you very much. We've enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you very much for your time.